This meeting to order. Karen, if you can take the roll.
President Furman.
Present.
Vice President Curry.
Here.
Alder Bennett. Alder Conklin is excused. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Alder Foster.
Here.
Alder Heck.
Here.
And Alder Abbas is excused. You have quorum.
Great. The first item of business would be our minutes. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any questions, concerns, comments about our meeting minutes? Not seeing any, and so unless I see otherwise, I'm going to assume unanimous consent. Okay, moving on to public comment. I have not loaded the report. Does anybody know if we have anybody registered for generic public comment? Karen, that looks like you're saying we do not.
We do not. Last I checked, and I have to reload it here, but there was nobody.
Yep, we do not.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great. We'll move on to disclosures and recusals. Do any members of the body have any disclosures or recusals to make this evening? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the first item for consideration on our agenda tonight, which is a referral. Legislative item 72440, directing city staff to provide public notification related to property development proposals, alcohol licenses, and other city businesses. I believe Alder Heck has a song and dance for us to talk about this. I don't know if Alder Foster, I know he's involved as well. Whichever of you would like to speak, go ahead.
I'm somewhat prepared for this, so can speak to it, and Alder Foster can jump in at any time. It's relatively simple. It's kind of unusual for items to be referred to CCEC these days, but the reason that this was referred is the last line in this resolution that has a potential action item for CCEC at times. But I'll back up and explain what it's all about first. Generally, what this does is deal with the problem that we had with the state's so-called 50-piece rule during election season. And Alder Foster and I were poking around with staff about ways to allow alders to continue to communicate with constituents during election season without violating that 50-piece rule. And really, it's about getting information out, not even just communicating. It's about the city still being and alders being able to get information out during election season. So what this resolution does is it sets up a framework so that staff can send out postcard notifications, for instance, for development proposals when there's a neighborhood meeting, public information meetings on other subjects, and also that notifications for our blog posts during election season are legitimized if they come from the IT system rather than directly from us. And according to the city attorney's office, he thinks that the city attorney thinks that we'll be fine if we pass this resolution. And then during election season, the council office, or even I think it's not just the council office, but any city staff, depending upon the situation, can still notify folks of what's going on. And alders' names can be on the postcard, but they won't appear to come from the alders. And that should take care of our problem. The last line of the resolution also says that city staff can send out and distribute additional public notifications or communications approved by the Common Council Executive Committee. So we added that in case there would be a situation that CCEC might want to empower staff to send out postcards. And if it's during election season, those alders who are running for re-election wouldn't be in violation of the 50-piece rule. So this is really kind of a bit of housekeeping in some ways, but it does set up a more reasonable situation for any alders that are running for election. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer, and maybe Alder Foster has something to add.
Thank you, Alder Heck. I did put him on the spot about an hour ago and told him I was going to call on him, and obviously, yes, he was ready. So thank you, Alder Heck. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Can someone please explain to me the rules around the blog that you mentioned?
The 50-piece rule?
The blog. You said something about the blog.
Yeah. During election season in 2021, incumbent alders who were running for re-election were not allowed to publish their blogs from about December 1st until the election, because it was considered mass communication to your constituents. And I think in effect, from our perspective, things won't really much change with regard to blogs, but what we're doing is making it clear that it's IT that sends the notifications of blog postings. It doesn't come from our personal accounts.
So IT controls the list. That's what you mean. The mailing list.
Yeah, and
Okay,
maybe Grant might have some clarification.
We also have Patricia Lawton from the city attorney's office here who put up her hand, so maybe she wants to further clarify that. Patricia, do you want to go ahead? You're muted. Uh-oh.
And she's closing.
Yeah, it looks like we may have lost her here.
No, she's back. Okay.
Yeah, so the 50-piece rule is basically part of Wisconsin law. It's part of the campaign finance laws. And so what it says is that any person who becomes a candidate for an election, so this would be like someone that's running for alder, can't use public funds for materials or distributing 50 or more pieces of identical material. So if you're going to do a mailing to your constituents, everybody is going to have more than 50 constituents. And so that is what the 50-piece rule is, but that doesn't apply to staff. It says the candidate can't do it. So what Alder Heck described is that in this way, it would be the staff that would send it out, because you still have to conduct your business as an elected official.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that.
Yeah.
I get that, but I don't understand why the blog. And then I follow Alder Heck's response, but he included that happened on the last election. So was that a last election only time? Is this a rule? Is there an ordinance that says I can blog?
It's a state law
for the blog.
Yeah,
itself.
so Alder Figueroa Cole, and for the last election, alders were able to continue to blog that were running for re-election, but those emails, so the email notification that residents got was turned off. Because there was a fear that we were violating the 50-piece rule. And so what this change is doing, and so I'll be the third person to explain this, but hopefully a slightly different way. What this change does is it allows for the notifications to continue, because alders are not sending out that notification. City staff is sending it out automated. And so functionality-wise, you won't notice a difference. The good news is when you post your blog, a notification will still go out. They're not going to stop it like they did in 2021. But it's not you sending it out. You're posting the blog, and then staff is sending it out via the system that staff uses to send out that notification.
Yeah, the concern was, I mean, in modern time, we use email to communicate a lot rather than a postcard with a stamp. And the concern was reading that distribution or sending out for those notices that would go out. We were concerned that in the electronic age, that would be falling under the 50-piece rule of materials and notifications. So that's why we stopped it.
Okay, got it. So you didn't really stop logging, you just didn't send the notifications and people needed to know to come and get them. Got it. I thought you were saving me some time, but obviously not. I thought to block. Got it. Thank you.
And obviously, those, to be clear, those blogs are not intended to be vote for me. They're intended to be for you to continue your city business.
Absolutely, which makes no sense when they say that the blogs were stopped. Like, duh.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what my confusion was. Like, what's going on here? Thanks for the explanation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder. Thank you, Patricia. Vice President Curry.
Thank you. I was going to say I'd defer to Alder Foster if he had further clarifications, but I think he put his hand down. I guess I'm a little confused. We're talking or highlighting an issue that happened during the 2021 election. Should this ordinance go through or the amendment go through, this would be enacted year-round, not just during the election season, correct? Okay. So I guess the question then is, for instance, when my experience working to get a neighborhood meeting organized and notification out, I think it was explained to me that either the applicant could pay or the alder could also pay using their alder account. And so since this isn't the current practice and there's 20 of us, are there significant impacts on staff or any budgetary considerations to make?
I can take a stab at that. It's really in some ways no change at all. It's kind of establishing a framework that empowers staff to do this, and it explicitly empowers staff to do this. When you have a development proposal, let's say in your district, you'll still go through the same process you go through now. It's just that during election season, we'll have to be particularly careful, and we want to make sure that the return address, for instance, is clear that it's coming from staff and not from the alder, and those types of things. But really, the process is going to be essentially identical to what it is now. And as far as I can tell, I don't know, maybe Alder Foster has some thoughts about that.
Thank you, Alder. Vice President Curry, do you want to hear from Alder Foster and see if you have any follow-up for after that? Great. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. I think folks have done a good job explaining it. I would say, big picture, yes, this really doesn't represent a formative change other than we'll now be able to continue or residents will continue to be able to get email notifications of blog posts during campaign season, and postcards will be able to go out for development proposals, alcohol licenses, et cetera. So this has been ongoing work since, Attorney Haas is really the one that identified this as a potential issue. Soon after he came on, we had been, there were some kind of homegrown rules around what happens during campaign season for alders prior to that, where there were some limitations around what you could use postcards for, but it didn't really mesh well with what the state statutes actually was. So I think Attorney Haas appropriately identified an issue, and it was a bit of a shock for those of us that were, running during the last season, and caused some real challenges communicating with constituents. I would say it's primarily in three areas. One is the blog notifications, email notifications that were mentioned. Another is development proposals, and the third is alcohol licenses. There are plenty of other things that happen as well, like parks, for example. Maybe there's a PIM related to parks in your district. But since those historically have been handled more by park staff, it was really a non-issue. But for development proposals and alcohol licenses especially, those had kind of historically been a sort of alder-initiated activity to get those meetings established. So this ordinance really does what state statute allows, which it explicitly says, you can't use public funds to send more than 50 of the same thing out unless there is an ordinance or a resolution directing staff to do so. And so that's essentially what this is just taking advantage of what the state statute allows and saying, okay, we recognize the value of this, and so we are agreeing to allow these communications to go out. This statute, I think, was written primarily for state elected. It applies to everybody, but it seems clear to me that they had themselves in mind when they wrote this. And for those of you that aren't aware, our state representatives it's really not a big deal for them to have a few months where they can't, send communications out. They don't have active proposals like we do here. And they're not really doing a lot of legislating during the months leading up to election. So it kind of had, I don't think they ever really considered the potential impact to local electeds and the amount of communication that runs through alders like it does here. So this really, I think, as Alder Heck said, is kind of more of a formality, but it'll avoid the issues that we ran into during last election cycle. I'll just add that there was quite a bit of work that went into looking at our overall processes, both for the land use approvals and alcohol licenses, which are the two big ones. And we actually have worked with staff, and there's some improvements coming along those lines, but they're not. This is really just sort of the more formal piece. But we have worked with planning staff and council staff to improve some of the support materials related to development proposals and some standards around public meetings for development proposals. And we've also worked with the clerk's office, and ALRC is considering some changes to the process for alcohol licenses that should also improve things. That all came out of this effort, but what's in front of us today at CCC is really just this formal piece of approving this direction to staff so that we can basically continue to do business as normal during election season.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Vice President Curry, I see you put your hand down, so I think you're all set with follow-up. And great. Any other questions, comments about this? Okay, can I get a motion? Alder Paulson, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed the button. I just wanted to ask one quick question. Are we changing this then year-round? Email updates will arrive. Right now, the sender and subject line for our blog update is from us. Is that going to change permanently, or is it only going to change during?
There'll be no changes to any of that. It will apply year round, but everything will happen the way it's happening today.
Okay, so 5 seconds. Okay, so it actually is coming from no reply at City of Madison. So, okay, never mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Now can I get a motion?
Move approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Second from Alder Heck. Any discussion? Not seeing any, I'm going to assume unanimous consent unless somebody raises their hand and says otherwise. Okay, now we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, Legislative File 72847, Subcommittee to establish a Common Council Code of Conduct. I'm going to turn the floor over to Vice President Curry, who will give an update on the email she sent out to alders and discuss the creation of a committee, or subcommittee. Vice President Curry.
Thank you, President Furman. So not much of an update, but since we last met and discussed forming a work group, the deadline to notify me of interest has passed. I did hear from two alders, Alder Tischler and Alder Vitiver, who were interested in being part of that subcommittee. And so we are now moving towards working with staff to establish hopefully a first meeting date in August. I'm trying to think where else. An email, once we figure out those times, will be shared with all council members, and as well as a reminder that it is an invitation for all to attend or even express interest in being a subcommittee member still. Part of I guess that will come later, the agenda, but trying to put together some resources that had been started previous by President Abbas when he was in that role, and then continued further with President Furman and this specific CCEC.
Thank you, Vice President Curry. So we're actually going to, this will be a subcommittee of CCEC, and members, any alder is allowed to be part of a subcommittee of CCEC. So I think tonight the goal is to actually have a motion and approval of the creation of the subcommittee now that we got the update. So if somebody wants to make a motion for creation of a subcommittee of CCEC to establish a Common Council Code of Conduct, the floor is open.
So moved.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion on the creation of this committee? Any questions for Vice President Curry? Not seeing any, unless I see otherwise, I will assume approval by unanimous consent. Fantastic. Moving right along. The next item will actually be fairly short. 72111, Alder onboarding and ongoing training. Wanted to let CCEC know that this has obviously been a priority and an important topic, and I wanted to run by what will be the next steps. Alder Figueroa Cole and I are going to start having meetings with different departments to start gathering information from different department heads on their view and their thoughts on how to better do onboarding for alders related to their departments. And then we're going to bring back that information and have discussions and make decisions here. I think part of me would have liked to have done a subcommittee or spent more time at CCEC having people come here. But looking at our agenda and all the different things going on, I think having an exercise where Alder Figueroa Cole and I go around and have some one-on-one meetings with departments and bring back that information and talk about it. And if there's further questions, we could bring people in. I think we'll really speed up and a really important piece of work. So I don't know if there's any questions about that or any thoughts. If people have any thoughts about stuff we should be asking, you could speak now or send us emails. But the idea here is for us. Alder Figueroa and Cole and I, not to necessarily be making decisions, but to be compiling information and bringing it back to this group where we can make some decisions on what that onboarding and ongoing training would look like going forward. So any questions, thoughts? Alder Foster.
Yeah, I'll just share two thoughts that folks have raised before that I support for you all to consider when you're doing that work. So one is the having presentations kind of like recorded by different agencies, I think is a great suggestion. So it'd be great to think about moving towards that and have those available for folks to watch when it works for them. And the other was the idea for to invite candidates to start that training ahead of time. I think that's a really excellent idea, actually. And I think anybody who's running and serious and maybe as long as it's after the kind of between the primary and the general election, seems like a really good opportunity for candidates to start getting some of that onboarding and education ahead of time. So those are just two ideas that folks have raised in the past that I wanted to lend some support to. I think would be good to incorporate in.
I appreciate that, Alder Foster. I think that will definitely be part of our discussions and part of helping staff think about different things. Anything else? All right, I'm not seeing any. Then we'll move on to our next item. This stuff is moving quickly tonight, but I promise you the next few items will probably take up a lot more time. Wanted to give an update on the TFOGS implementation work group. The membership of that group expired on April 20th, and so far, as president, I have not reappointed anybody to that group. Hoping that we would probably do seeing that we'd probably be doing most of that work here at CCEC. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to quickly review with everybody what the charge of that implementation work group was, and then also give you guys a copy, which is attached to the legislative item, of what's called the recommendation tracker that we used as part of that group that gave status on each of those items. So the TFOGS, I think it was something like 40 some odd recommendations. The TFOG's implementation work group broke that into categories and was very focused on trying to come up with implementable proposals for council to deal with. And so I'm going to share my screen and just show some things very quickly. And then I'm hoping at the end of this conversation that this group can give some sort of direction on, yes, we think, bringing back the work group is a good idea, or yes, based on what we're working on here at CCEC, we think we're going to get those other things addressed here, and that, it doesn't make sense to try to figure out how to schedule that group. So very quickly, for those who may not have seen this before, I'm going to show what the definition of the group was. So let me share a Word document I have. See if I can get that a little bit clearer on the screen. But this is a legislative file, and so that actually created the group and talked a little about the creation of TFOGs, the TFOGs itself, and the final report, and the idea of what the group was working on. And so I will do one page and get a little bit bigger page width. Let's see. Is that better? Can people see now much better? Okay. So the idea is that the group would be working with the recommendations made in the final report, and that they would be creating proposals related to those recommendations, getting additional information, seeking input from other parties, putting forth alternative proposals on those recommendations, and seeking guidance from CCEC if necessary. So that was comprised of 5 alders to be appointed by the president, with at least 1 alder who had served on TFOGs and at least 1 alder who served on CCEC. So this is the definition. You can find that in Legistar as well, but I just wanted everybody to at least see kind of what this group's charge was. Any questions about the charge before I move on to the list of recommendations that we're working with? We do have a bunch of people here that were part of it, so I'm sure they remember this well. Not seeing any questions, I'm going to share Alder Figueroa-Cole. Go ahead.
I think it's a good point to clarify that the list of recommendations was already provided, and we were working with the constraints of that list. I think one of the things that kept on coming during the last committee or group was this desire to continue to add things to the list or remove things from the list. And it seemed to me that it wasn't really clear that the list wasn't supposed to grow. It wasn't supposed to work with that list. And I mean, so I don't know if I misinterpreted that, but it seemed like it was a recurring theme. And if I'm wrong, please correct me.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, I think that's one of the advantages of having this work at CCEC. We're not really confined by just those recommendations. But TFOGs had a list of recommendations, and the goal at that group was to come up with stuff based on that. We obviously grouped some of that stuff together because it just made sense for certain items to be together. Some of the items didn't require action, but the charge very much of that work group was to focus on the recommendation list. And I will admit, though, the recommendation list did give some flexibility to, look at one of the recommendations that came out of the implementation work group, for example, was changing public comment earlier, if you recall. I don't believe that was actually an exact recommendation. I think a recommendation was talking about separating public comment and debate. But I think there was some ability to make recommendations based on that. But it's very specifically, really, we're supposed to focus on that list of 40 some odd recommendations from the TFOGs report. Vice President Curry.
Oh, yes, I almost forgot. I wanted clarification around the eligibility or the needs of the makeup of the work group. It was clear that someone who served previously on the TFOGs, but then is it served or currently serves on CCEC?
Currently serves on CCEC.
Okay, thanks.
And so the idea was, at least one from a member of TFOGs, and the only person that's actually left at this point would be me. And actually Alder Abbas did serve for a short period of time. And then, CCC could have been any of the current members. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share that tracker so you guys can get a little bit of an idea of if the committee was resurrected or that work was done here, what that looks like. When we can pull up our list of tasks that CCEC is working on and see how some of that maps back. This spreadsheet is showing the overall category that the implementation work group tried to categorize things into. The recommendation number that comes directly from the TFOG's final report, and then the status as of July. The first three items that are on the screen are all related to the 311 system. We got an update on that recently. There's nothing for the work group really to be doing on that unless CCEC decided they wanted some sort of work to be done by somebody other than CCEC. We could also achieve that through a subcommittee. There are different ways to achieve that, but essentially the TFOG's implementation work group really looked at that as something that was in CCEC's hands previously, and I personally believe that to be the case. All these status updates are from me. I was the chair. This status report you're seeing was not approved by the committee, but should reflects the committee's work, in my opinion, based on share. The next recommendations have to do with appointments and chairs of BCCs. The first one had very specifically, recommendation 17 had very specifically related to if we went full time. There's no work to be done on that because we're, until if and when we become full time. So it's sort of an item that's put aside. There's definitely a desire for the executive committee to understand more and be possibly more involved with mayor's appointment of residents and alders to BCCs to ensure more of a review. I think that will be a future discussion item for CCEC. That's kind of it's a difficult thing for a lot of reasons that we can get into on how you would do that review. But I think there are ways where the mayor could probably be giving us reports about vacancies and helping explain some of the things that are going on there. So certainly could involve further discussion by CCEC. The last thing had to do with chairs of BCCs. We had a legislative item 67082 that actually the council passed that was part of that discussion. It does actually allow a little bit of a tweak to allow alders to be chairs, but only in specific cases. I'm not going to get into too much detail on that, but that item is considered done. BCC admin support and resident engagement. There's an administrative service team. We'll talk about that more at a future CCEC meeting. Definitely something that we should be checking in and seeing what direction we want to go with that, but that's something the council established, legislative item 61541. The council created that in the fall of 2020. And then another item that just says that the city should review processes and procedures related to BCC so residents can participate better. I think virtual has been part of that, but then a lot of that's part of the BCC organizational discussion that we had at a previous meeting that we will continue to have here. Lots of stuff related to BCC organization and structure. I'm not going to go into that too much other than to say that, that is an item that we have taken up here. That is an item that's going to need, a lot of attention, I think, from a group. And so far, CCEC has been focused on that at our last meeting or the meeting before, if I recall correctly. That could be a task, a very big task for an implementation work group if we wanted to get that going again. Lots of things related to Legistar. I'm not going to go through the whole list other than to say that the IT department is working on an upgrade. The work group did believe that to be in the hands of CCEC, and it was willing to work more on it if CCEC had requested. Two items related to the mayor's office, that the mayor should not restrict or expand the mayor's veto power. Obviously nothing to be done there. An item that's interesting that we can get into at some point is the mayor's administrative span of power and direct reports. I think at the time when we talked about this, the mayor had something like 33 direct reports or something. And so there was a little bit of a note by TFOG saying, is that the best structure to have that kind of reporting in place? At some point, somebody should be looking more into that. And so that's definitely up for further discussion. Lots of things related to meeting protocols. Some of it not as much of an issue with virtual, but still an issue. And some of that is part of the BCC reorganization discussion, and some of that it should just be further discussion here, or possibly, if we want the work group to go. That includes childcare at meetings, validating parking for meeting attendees. We have started some work on making the council proclamations before legislative business begins at 6:30. Allowing video testimony or live electronic participation via the internet or remote places. We accomplished that with hybrid. There's still some work with our legislative upgrade where hopefully people might be able to submit videos of testimony. Separating public testimony from legislative debate. We did that by moving things into the beginning of the meeting. There's a suggestion about varying meeting location throughout the city that could be considered in the future. The old request of avoiding late night meetings. Obviously, we're trying to do some work here at CCEC on that. Adhering to or changing current rules regarding the length of alder statements at council meetings. That's also related to the length of the meeting. So that's stuff that we can continue to work on here. And there's some things behind the scenes that are being worked on for a clock and to remind people, and having the chair encourage people to remember that time. A desire to create an office of resident engagement. The 2022 budget did include the first steps with an engagement position. That certainly needs future work and something that would take a long time, I think, to look at, where the place for that type of work is long term. Overall structure stuff, Madison should retain the mayor council form of government. That's a done. We should not pursue first class city status, a very technical definition of the city that Milwaukee, it's the case in Milwaukee. We're not going to do that here. So that's overall structure, and then stuff related to the size and shape of the council. And so, we should maintain geographic aldermanic district representation, no action required, and then a lot of stuff related to a discussion about referendum. And so that was me talking really fast, going over stuff, but ultimately the buckets to think about when we look at the undone or the work that TFOGS has not accomplished yet would be stuff related to the referendum, stuff related to BCCs, and then some stuff related to meetings, meeting protocols, with a few other little things sprinkled in there. So that hopefully gives people a very quick overview. I can share that again if people have direct questions about it, of the undone work of the implementation work group. I do strongly believe that this work should be continued through this body. I think it's the appropriate use of this body with a lot of those items are. But I'm open for discussion and open for suggestions. If we decide not to do the implementation work group, I would put together, introduce something at council to get rid of the work group. Nobody's appointed to it at this time. If this group feels strongly that this work is better done by having a separate group and having that group report back to CCEC, we can certainly do that. And I could put out a call for people that are interested in that. So thoughts? Alder Foster.
Yeah, I agree. I think so I've been on the TFOGS implementation work group since it was created. I was the primary author for create the resolution that created it, and feel really proud of the work that we've done in several iterations of the group from the last term and then from the current term. And I think we worked through 30, how many were there? 40 something, a lot. We've got, really, I think just a couple, three or four sort of, big things. But I think they're all things that definitely would have, I think required or at least benefited from CCEC direction anyway. And so I think having those things taken over by CCEC to finish out what's remaining makes a ton of sense. And I'm looking forward to those conversations and that work here. And obviously, we can still do work, and staff can still do work in between our meetings. And there's a lot that's going to be required to move some of those bigger ones, like the BCC reorg that we talked about last time. So also, just supportive of it all, and would support a resolution to end that work group.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I agree entirely with Alder Foster. I guess, I know about TFOGs and have delved into some of these recommendations in the past in various capacities, but I do worry a little bit but about focus of CCE focusing properly. We don't, in my opinion, have a lot of time to make some of these things happen. And our conversation at our last meeting about BCC showed that we all have, a wide variety of ideas and experiences. And I think most of those ideas were great, but they were some of them competing. And I think we'll have to make sure that almost every time we work on these items at CCEC that we focus on exactly what we're working on, and not redoing TFOG's work. But other than that, sort of cautionary advice, I'm excited to get to work on some of this. And so thanks.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that I think should stay at CCEC, and some of it maybe is more quiet. Continuing to give directions on 301 and moving that forward, meeting protocols. Legistar, I continue to give feedback on that sort of updates. I wonder if BCCs are a big enough beast to sort of do something a little different with, and maybe that is a separate working group. I'm loath to say that we need another committee on committees, but that's the one that I don't know if CCC wants to sort of take that entire project on, because there just are so many. There are a lot of ideas about that, and maybe that's, if you carve off all the BCC stuff and say, okay, the CCC is going to take on everything else, I think that might make some sense. But BCCs, I'm not sure where you want to go on that. Sorry, that's not super helpful.
No, it is helpful, and I'll give you my thoughts on it after Alder Foster. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on both of the previous comments. I agree, and it's worth pointing out. There's a big difference between a work group and CCEC, and the way that we can work on things is different. And so by me saying I support moving this work to CCEC, that is me, like, I'm not assuming we're going to act like a work group here and that we're going to just like spend 90 minutes or 2 hours like brainstorming and that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think that's really appropriate for this body. I think Alder Furman mentioned, or maybe it was Alder Heck, just the amount of work that has been done. So for all of these things, it's not like these were just put aside by the TFOG's implementation work group and haven't been dug into yet. It's actually, there's been tremendous work on all of them. And so I think what I expect is that CCC will be the guiding body. It will get, okay, here's the thoughts, here's where things were sort of left with TFOG's implementation. And also certainly for the big ones like BCC, it's going to require a large amount of work outside of these sessions. Work groups in general, I've been on a lot of them with the city before I was an alder. It's really tough to do this kind of work in even a work group. So the reality is we're going to need really strong staff support on BCC restructuring, for example. I think we talked through this last time. So that's going to make it or break it for this one. And what we need is really good ideas and alternatives to have CCC react to, give feedback on. ultimately drive where this is going. But the work, CCC is not going to be a work group, and is not going to be able to do what's needed to move any of these forward on our own. So I just want to highlight that. And also, I think we need to be very careful about creating committees and work groups. I think if it's a subcommittee of CCEC, very much in the vein of what we just recommended or created, I guess, just a moment ago with this other one, I think, keep it to 3 people. You can do work a little bit more nimbly that way. I think so. I think that could be helpful for staff to make sure that there's, good direction in between. But at the end of the day, CCEC as a body needs to be giving direction and really steering where everything's going, and then ultimately it's council to approve. So I'm open to all of those ideas, and I think if we do create any formal bodies, they should be very small, and because it's just really challenging getting even a 5-person or more than that. It's really challenging for everybody involved, and it takes a lot of staff support just to administer those things. So we should not do something like that lightly.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I think the only thing I would add is, I think Alder Foster said that even much better than I could, is we will continue to revisit that idea of what exactly to do with the BCCs. I don't think an implementation work group is the answer, or the previous constructed implementation work group is the answer. I'm not convinced right now that I definitely know what the plan is on our BCC reorg, which is just such a big project. There was certainly some direction that was decided by CCEC that the CCEC wanted to hear back, but I think CCEC continuing to provide direction there, I think, is going to be important. And if there's some work that's being done, that might be useful to have a small work group to put things together and bring back for discussion and more direction here. We can certainly look at that as that item continues to develop. So it doesn't look like I'm hearing any strong objection to dissolving that and moving the work into here. So I will move forward with that. That item will come back here again. I'll refer the dissolving here. And then we will continue to put these related items on our agenda and make sure that we're moving along those discussions. Alder Foster.
Yeah, just thinking, I wonder if our chief of staff could even pull, CCC members as a starting point. If there are, it's really important to have somebody who has the time and, passion. And so if we've got, if we can identify those 3 or 4 things that are going to take a little bit of effort, we just did the kind of anti-harassment piece, but BCCs is a good one. It'd be great to know from CCC who has interest and capacity, whether it's on a subcommittee or quite frankly, there's nothing that stops, any member from working with the chief of staff or with other staff or council president or whoever. Obviously always being thoughtful about quorum issues, but I think everybody should be thinking about, and maybe when we look at future agenda items, in what are the things that we're trying to accomplish in the next, 7 months or 8 months, I guess. And who's willing to put time and energy into them, because that's how stuff's going to get done. So something to think about.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Heck.
Thanks. That sort of sparked a thought in my little brain about as soon as possible, perhaps having a timeline established for really almost all the recommendations that we think we're going to deal with, or at least like topics. It doesn't have to be as broad as BCC, but I think as soon as we can get some sort of timeline established, it'll in some ways, it'll make it easier for me to say, yes, I have the capacity to work on this for X number of weeks or something like that. I mean, that might be kind of difficult to do, and it would have to be flexible, but that's just a thought. Thanks.
Oh, I appreciate that. Alder Heck, that was something that the TFUGS implementation work group, I think, did a pretty decent job of. You don't see that in this version of the tracker, but we actually said some of the items like, this is something we're going to talk about in October. This is an item we're going to talk about in February. So that way people understood kind of here's what we're working towards, here's what we need to prepare. We have been doing, and we'll have that as an agenda item today, we have been doing, what does our next meeting look like? But it is my intent, hopefully before our next meeting, to actually plan out the rest of the year. And I don't think it's going to be the exact way the rest of the year looks, but I think, there are a bunch of items, and you'll see when I share my screen in a no assignment column and saying, okay, this is something that we're going to talk more about in November, and make sure we have things ready for that, et cetera. But I do think there is so much to do, and we need to have it mapped out and know what we're looking at. So thank you for that. Okay, no action required on that item at this time. So I'm going to move on to our next item, which is discussion of a TFOGS related item. I don't know if we'll make any decisions on this evening, but at least want to plant the seed and let people know where we were with talking about a referendum at our December 7th, 2021 Common Council meeting. The Common Council did put back the task of coming up with binding referendum items to the TFOGS implementation work group. I have a copy of the presentation, a little bit tweaked from that discussion at the Common Council meeting, and an update of what was discussed earlier this year with the TFOGS implementation work group related to the referendum. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see this presentation that I got, and show you folks where we are on the referendum questions, at least where how TFOGS implementation work group left it, and this group can certainly do as it pleases if we're going to see referendum questions. I've got a lot of things on my monitor. Can somebody confirm that they see the presentation full screen? Yes, great, thank you. So I'm not going to go through every slide here. It's in Legistar, but this is all literally stuff that was presented in front of the council in December 2021, talking about the background of TFOGS and all the work that was put into TFOGS and why recommendations were what they were, and the thoughts on why the questions ended up being what they were. So I'm skipping through all that. We'll come to the important slide of the non-binding referendum. The idea behind the non-binding referendum was to take the pulse of the city. There wasn't a lot of work done explaining to people what any of these questions meant, but the idea was to ask these non-binding questions and then have the council decide what it wanted to do with those results and whether or not it wanted to have any binding questions on the ballot. I think it was pretty clear from the discussion at council, and actually I may have said December. I'm not sure the council actually even meant December. I think it actually was closer to January. I think we had to delay that meeting, and it ended up being very close to the deadline for getting things on the spring 2022 ballot. But the thought from the council was if we were going to do anything, we should be looking at the 2023 April election. The questions that were asked, I'm going to go through each of them and just remind people which are required to be binding and which were just advisory. And so the first question that was asked was asking people whether or not they thought we should have a full-time council. The results were, you could see on the screen, 58% said no and 42% said yes. Having talked to TFOG members, I think some don't actually agree with how we, as a TFOGS committee, even phrased the idea of full-time. But this is what was given from the non-binding. I will say and remind people, we do not have to ask for a binding referendum on whether or not the council is full-time. It's a complete budget decision by the council. The council cannot raise its own salary. So the council can't say, hey, we're all of a sudden paying ourselves more money, but we can say the next council can do that. So effective April 2023, if we wanted to, we can certainly raise all their salaries just by changing our budget, changing our ordinance. So the TFOGS group, implementation work group, they voted that they did not recommend putting this question back on the ballot. If it was on the ballot, it would have just been advisory. And so, this group, I said, can totally decide that they think that question should be there, or they could agree with the implementation work group. And then obviously, ultimately, the council has to decide what it wants. But the recommendation that did come out of the implementation work group was not to ask this question again. Any thoughts before I move on about this question? Do people feel strongly like this is a question we should be going and asking again, or Alder Foster?
Yeah, I feel I feel that we should not ask this on a binding referendum, but as I shared previously our chief of staff is working on a final draft, or maybe already has it done. I haven't looked at last week's email yet, but we'll be sending that survey out related to sort of time commitment, and I shared some initial info on pay numbers. So I'm very interested in having the discussion of pay for the next term of alders beginning in April, and having that during our budget discussion. So I'm personally committed to continuing this conversation through our budget discussions this year, and do not think we should go back to the public with this confusing question as a binding question.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Any other thoughts? Not seeing any, we'll move on to the next question. The next question had to do with council size. We tried to give people a bunch of different choices. Letting people know, I'm not sure how many people knew that we had 20 alders, but should we remain the same, increase the size, or reduce the size? 70% believed we should remain the same, and then the rest obviously thought we should either reduce or increase, with reduce being 17% and increase being 13%. The implementation work group did take a vote on this, and it was a split vote, but there was a 3-2 decision from that group to actually put a question on the ballot that looked at doing changing the size to 10. This particular question is a binding question that does require voters to decide. It's part of our charter ordinance. There's information attached to the legislative item on this item with a memo that talks about changing the charter ordinance, but that does require voters to do it. So the council can't decide to be 10 or 30. This is something that voters would have to decide. Again, with like the other question, CCEC can take the recommendation of the implementation work group and figure out the actual language of a question related to 10. CCEC can make a different recommendation, but ultimately the council will have to decide what's on the ballot. Any thoughts on this particular question related to council size? Alder Foster.
Yeah, so as folks can see on the bottom here, I voted against bringing this one back to the public. I would say for me, it's you have to be a little bit careful looking at the data, and you can make all kinds of arguments about why it is what it is. But to me, it's really clear that there's not a strong movement for any kind of change on that front. And I, of all of the questions we asked, the results on this one seem to be the most convincing to me, and so I just think I don't think it's very worthwhile, honestly, and I think there's a little bit of a risk from the public to just feel frustrated about the question if we don't do an educational campaign or something more about it. So I continue to not be enthusiastic about putting this back as a binding question in April, and fully expect we'll have results very similar to what we saw in the advisory referendum.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Figueroa-Cole.
To me, this goes hand in hand with the salary question. So if we are not going to have a full-time council, I mean, this is impossible to have a reduced amount of alders, which means more work, and still have a part-time council. So this is kind of a contradictory thing too. So I mean, I agree that there's no point to put it back in there as a referendum.
If we're not going full-time.
Yeah, exactly.
Other thoughts from the committee? Alder Paulson.
I guess I always, as a member of the public, I was a little puzzled by some of the questions, and just sort of, there were these questions that I think they didn't make a lot of sense in isolation. And so it was hard to sort of like really kind of know what to do with a lot of these things. And so this was one that, you weren't going to vote to reduce the size unless you were gung-ho on going full time or not. But yeah, I think I voted increase on this one, so it was like kind of a weird one. But I voted no on full time, and so I think putting just sort of reducing the size. I think we need to have a full story about it. What are we actually doing? And I think that might have helped last time, rather than giving 17 options, which people were putting together in weird ways. I think it might have been better if the TFOGs implemented. If the recommendation had been we should go full time, 4-year, 10-person council, should have had one question on that ballot and gotten to see what we wanted to see there. So I'm worried I don't want to put too many more questions on the ballot if they're going to also be sort of all over the place. Like, I think if we're going to put something on the ballot, let's just here's what we want to do. Yes or no.
Appreciate that. So I can give you some background too, very briefly. So the implementation work group, the question that they very specifically had said would be 10. So that wasn't TFOGs. That was the implementation work group, in its discussions earlier this year. So I think, the thought of that group was if we were putting back on the ballot, we were going to be very specific about 10. Will tell you from having been on TFOGs and part of the recommendation votes, there was a lot of struggle on the recommendation of 10 alders full time. The 4 years wasn't as much of a struggle, but it was this weird place where there was a belief by what ended up being the majority of the group that if we were going full time, we had to bring it down to 10. And if you look at the TFOGs report data, it does go into a lot of detail on why a smaller size makes sense. If you look at cities very much like Madison, we are a huge outlier with 20. I mean, it's not even close. There's nobody that has a council our size, and so there was it wasn't clear, though, I will tell you from TFOGs, did we pick 10 just because of the outlier, or did we pick 10 because of the full time? And there was an attempt to revisit that because there was some conflict related to that, and it was deadlocked. It was actually remarkable. The committee just went through a while different ways of looking at it, including increasing. There were people on the committee that actually thought that we should have more council members. Smaller constituent sizes was a good thing for alders, allowing for more personal representation. And so the thought behind the question was to take the pulse with very, very, very little education. And so I agree that, frankly, the referendum questions were a free survey. It was an ability for us to do a free survey, trying to ask voters what they think, knowing that we did not set up anything to actually explain. By the way, this is why TFOG said 10, or this is what TFOG said. The question actually doesn't even say 10. It says nothing about that. It says nothing about the TFOG's results and where that came from. And so if there was a question, I think we should be very specific about the question because it should be binding. And then there would be required education on why are you saying this? Are you saying this just because you're worried about paying 20 alders full time? Are you saying this because we're a huge outlier when it comes to size? And, does a body of 20, work as well? Would a body of 10 work better? So yeah, there would definitely be required education and messaging. But whatever this question is, it would have to be more clear. Do we, as a body, want to take a vote on this now? Do people want to kind of think about this and have this come back as a topic? Alder Heck.
I'm not going to answer your last question. I have another question. Did the implementation work group talk? I mean, maybe what you just described has answered my question, but did the implementation work group talk about a single question for the referendum that described what we want? The whole package, and then yes or no, or because of what you were just saying, that it was impossible to come to much of a consensus in order to describe, to have one question that said, do you support a 10-person council full time, ... yes or no? Did you ever, so that people can see all the components together and perhaps recognize how they work together? And plus, you need education. But are you saying that the implementation work group really couldn't come to consensus, or even TFOGS itself couldn't come to much of a consensus on some of these issues? So there was no, overall scenario that was pretty much supported by everybody?
So there are different versions. So I want to try to be clear maybe when I answer this, and Alder Foster could correct me if I'm not explaining this well. So the TFOGS itself did have an overall recommendation, right? I mean, the TFOGS recommendation is 10 full-time 4-year with term limits. And so there were 4 questions that, so that was clear. I mean, so the report says, if full-time, then that should be term limits. It should be full-time, and it should be 10, and they should have 4-year terms. When the first, I'm pretty sure in Alder, this is where I'm a little bit unclear, but I do believe it was the first implementation work group. When they looked at the questions, there was all sorts of different ways to do it. And I think the thought was, we're going to do this as a free survey. We want to get the pulse. We know we're not going to be able to do a ton of education. There were members of TFOGS that came to our meeting and to this day are very upset that we took that path of dividing them up and maybe not just doing one question. But it was looked at as like, let's think about this separately. And I think there are definitely pros and cons. If I did it all over again, I'm not sure I would have voted to do the way we did it, because we sort of made it more difficult for ourselves going forward. But regardless, it was intended to influence and not to say this was the final decision, knowing that very little education was put into place and very little campaign. The last group in January that was working on this after council direction, I don't recall us looking at just doing one question. I think we were very specifically, I think everybody obviously believed that we shouldn't ask again about full-time because that was up to the council. We didn't need voter approval to decide that, and we struggled obviously with voter approval, our understanding even what that meant. I know I've spoken to candidates that became Alder that when they were candidates, they were like, no way should this be a full-time position. And now that they're Alder, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how this isn't a full-time position. I don't know how anybody does this part-time. So it's sort of a weird question that we didn't need voter approval. So I think the group just decided. And then on these questions, I don't think we looked at combining them. And there was not consensus on council size, so it was hard to ask about that. Well, there was a 3-2, and then skipping ahead, we did have universal approval of the idea of the 4-year term question, and then we never got to the question about term limits, which is a very interesting discussion because the question did said if full time, and I'm not sure everybody read that if full time thing. So. That's a really long way to answer, but I do think we do have the flexibility to do whatever we want at this point, knowing that we have to the term limit and the whether it's 2 or 4 years or how many people are on the council has to be approved by voters. We cannot do that as a council. The voters have to do that. How we phrase that, I guess we would have to clarify with legal. But sure, we could. I guess there is an opportunity to probably put a question on to say, do you want to go 4 years, 10 Alders full time, and just have that be a question? There's probably the ability to do that if that's something we wanted to do. We could certainly look into that more.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in that because I think it relates to what Alder Paulson was talking about. It's really impossible for people to understand the interaction between these questions unless we have millions of dollars of public engagement budget.
Well, and the thing that I struggle with too is I actually don't want to make the 10-person decision based on salary. I actually, at the end of the day, if we go full time, we shouldn't just say, well, we're full time now. We can't afford to have 20. I think the 20 question. I'm not sure that 20 question should be tied to full-time as much as TFOGS tied it to. And so that was kind of the disappointing thing about TFOGS, where we just sort of got to the end where it was like, we didn't have robust discussions on like, are we just doing this because of budget? And don't get me wrong, budget's a problem, but are we doing this because this is the right thing to do? And then you had people that were arguing we should have more Alders. And so it was a very complicated, very, very hard discussion that we're throwing out to voters to decide with even less discussion and even less understanding.
All right. I'll cease for now.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Alder Foster.
Don't desist. Yeah, I think my memory honestly is that the V1 implementation work group was working on this question and what to do, and there was a lot of like confusion around timing and the redistricting and all kinds of stuff. We were working with Attorney Strange, and we brought it to the full council for discussion, as you remember, Alder Heck, I think twice, and I'm the one that brought back to the implementation work group and said, I think we should do a non-binding. I think we should split them apart. So I, bear some of the blame for what we have here. I can tell you, I was very convinced that nothing would get passed out of council to put that one question all wrapped together. There was so much. And you can remember, and just really confusing misinformation, bizarre testimonies, just hurt feelings. It was weird, and a lot of people were against it for all different and sometimes opposing reasons. And so I honestly was very much fearful that would not get approved, and TFOGs the recommendations would basically just die. And I felt like this was the best we could do to continue the public conversation. I think one of my biggest concerns also was, even if council would have magically approved it, we would have done a horrible job public information education wise. And we would do that again right now. Like if CCC said, yes, let's do this new thing, we gave the marching orders, like it would, 85% of people would say they feel not informed enough to make decisions on this stuff. Cause that's what TFOGs heard when they were doing their public outreach, right? They did, and anyway, So I think that's why we ended up where we at. As Alder Furman has said, this was a survey, and like a pretty good survey in terms of reach, because everyone that voted in that election did it. So I think we should take that for what it is. If somebody thinks this council wants to put on a combo, here's the combo recommendation from TFOG, let's put it out there. I think there's at least one person on the TFOG group that'd be very satisfied with that. I doubt it would pass. I wouldn't object to it. I don't really care. But having participated, having been in the room for those couple of meetings where that singular recommendation came out, that's all tied together, I think, as Alder Furman has sort of suggested, I didn't leave that experience feeling like, wow, this is like the perfect culmination of that, however much amount of really good work. And I think if those discussions would have happened at a different meeting or a couple weeks later, could have had a very different, one combo recommendation come out of TFOGs, or maybe not even that. Who knows? So I don't hold the combo recommendation as the sort of culmination of that work. And I think that, to me, it was such good work, and there's so much good information, so much insight. To me, our job is to figure out what do we think we can do the best for improving local government. And the next one that President Furman had up there, number 3, moving from 2 years to 4 years, that's an example of one where I personally feel like that I very strongly support that. I think the results from the non-binding were very mixed, and I think that is, for me, an example of something I'd like to. I think it's very manageable. It's a very focused question, and I think it'd be great to have some public conversation around that, and have the public have an opportunity to consider moving alder terms from 2 to 4. And would love to have that conversation with my colleagues here and on the council floor as well.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I'll just. I want to start off by saying that I did actually like a lot of the TFOG's report. I thought, and I thought it actually did do really great work and highlighted a lot of really great stuff. And I am appreciative of the work that group did. I did not agree with the core recommendation about council, a full-time smaller council on 4 years. And I personally spent my referendum survey questions voting against that. And so I'm not super sure. And I think a lot of people did sort of understand that the question on the ballot was, do you want a 10-person 4-year full-time council? And I think a lot of the votes were in reaction to that. So even though it was split up, I think that's how folks voted and considered everything all together, which it makes it a little muddy to take apart. I'm not sure that right now for a 2023 referendum that we've got enough time to have a robust conversation about this, especially since there'll be alder elections, there'll be a mayoral election. I think this is going to get sort of pushed down just in the space of time for public conversation. And I guess I don't have I still don't think 10 is right, so I'm not going to get into what should go on the ballot. I don't want to put this on the ballot because I don't want 10. But I'm not sure on the public conversation that trying to get it all done by 2023 is the best way to have that conversation.
Yeah, I want to add a few quick things. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with the questions in retrospect is I think people can read the answers any way they want them. So I think the idea that, people understood what they were voting for, whether it was 10 or full time or whatever, there are people that are very convinced we should have term limits based on how people responded to the term limit question, even though the term limit question very clearly says if full time, I will note on timing, I think there's plenty of time for us to do whatever we wanted for 2023, especially if we can get this approved in the next month or two. If we don't do it for 2023, 2024 is not a city election, it's a county election, and would require the city to spend money on a special election as part of the county, so to pay to get it on there. And then you're dealing with a different voting base that's not necessarily the same as voting for alders or voting for the mayor. And so if you want the best bang for your buck and to get the most voters on the 2023 election because it's a mayoral and alder election, I think it probably would be very difficult for this group to actually, I don't even think we would be able to say that it should be on the 2024 ballot. And so that would be something that the next council would have to look at. And at that point, you're getting so much further away from the work at TFOGS and the people that were involved in that and able to market that and talk about that. And so for me, I'm not hearing strong desire to go 10 tonight. I don't know if it's even worth revisiting when we have more members. If other people feel strongly about that, I do feel strongly about the 10 number. I have no idea how the council would vote, but I do think that the referendums are now or never. You either do them 2023 or you just we put it aside and move on to other work and not worry about those recommendations and just say we decided not to do anything with them. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you change your mind? Obviously.
No, well, I mean, again, if we were going to 10, that would require a lot of. It should be a data-driven education campaign on that regard, so people understand how we compare to other cities. And I don't know if we had the resources and the time to do that. So to me, honestly, of all these questions, the most relevant, it is the 4-year term. Like, I really would like to get to that discussion.
I will say that. I mean, the good news is if you did want to have a data discussion about the 10, that there's a ton of that in the TFOGS report.
Not for me. Like,
yeah. I understand. Yep.
Just to educate the public, to really for them to understand how that works in other cities. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just because something isn't easy doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But I understand and I appreciate that. Alder Heck, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I'm not saying I want to do this, but if we chose not to do nothing, all we have to do is pass a new resolution, right?
If we don't want to do anything, I don't believe we have to do anything. I don't believe we have to take any action. I think at this point, CCEC would generate a recommendation. Then it would be on somebody. I would take that recommendation and introduce it as a resolution, to go forward if we were going forward with stuff. But if this group just decides we don't want to put anything as a referendum, we'll just, put a checkbox next to these items, say that we talked about it, decide not to do anything, and leave it for the future if anybody wants to revisit it.
Okay. I guess I'll just summarize. My thoughts are really, I think something that Alder Foster might have referred to in the beginning as pay equity is really what it's all rooted in, and how we how we convey that, I don't know.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Alder Foster.
Well, just to move the conversation along, I would put a motion out there for a recommendation to put the question of changing from a 2-year to a 4-year term limits as a binding referendum question in 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. Any discussion on that? Obviously, that doesn't preclude our ability to do any of the other referendum questions. And then, I guess I would like to hear from Alder Foster what the next steps are. Would you bring language back here based on CCEC saying, please do that, and then we would approve that language? Or would you just bring that to the council and then it would come through CCEC? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'd love to have a little discussion here and hear from folks, and would be happy to work on getting a resolution. I think it'd be pretty straightforward and simple, and it could get referred here as well. But I guess I'll just say briefly, that one to me felt like a pretty split vote. Again, there wasn't a lot of robust conversation. I think there was a lot of good public conversation that I think the non-binding questions did spark. I didn't hear a lot around this one. I would say for me, I was feeling pretty ambivalent when this was actually on the ballot, and shared some feelings in a blog post about that. Could kind of see it both ways. But as I've continued to reflect on my own work on the council, and I've really been thinking about the council as an institution and what we can do to strengthen it, because it's quite frankly, it's just a very weak institution and it needs a lot of help and support. And I think pay, as Alder Heck mentioned earlier, and as I've brought up, is something that I think needs to be addressed. And I'll be working on that one, not through a referendum, but I think moving to a 4-year instead of a 2-year term actually would be tremendously important and valuable for the council as an institution. It's really we need more experienced members on the council, quite frankly, and we're in a spot where there's so much, so many new people, and it's not really very effective to do the work that we're charged with, and that people want from us, and when we campaign and we hear all of the things people care about and we are really excited about it, and we come into office and it's just too tough right now. And there's no way, I would say it took me probably, definitely through the first 2 years to really know what was going on. And I had the advantage of participating before being on council. So I just think we need to move this direction. I think anybody that can actually do the commitment should make a commitment for 4 years. I think it opens up some interesting opportunities around staggering terms as well, where we could have every 2 years there could still be an aldermanic election, and not have such high turnover. Where we could really limit that turnover to something more like a quarter instead of a half. I think would be really, really helpful for the council as an institution. So, really curious on other people's thoughts and interested in the conversation.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Figueroa-Cole.
For me, the only concern I have with this is really going back to inclusion and equity when it comes to the people that are willing to serve, but perhaps are not in positions of specifically people that may move a lot, like renters or whatever. Like, to me, that's kind of a question mark. Like, how can we ensure that if someone that puts themselves out there to serve and he has to move because of the cost of rent continues to go, and they find something, they're forced to move around outside of the district. How do we manage that kind of thing? How do we ensure that there's inclusion when it comes to that particular part of the job where you have to serve on the areas that you have to live on the area that you serve? So I mean, there's some statistics out there about how mobile our rental population is. And we do want to reach out to everybody. We do want to reach out to people that have those experiences. So again, the pay is super important to be able to manage that. So if we were to pay people accordingly to do this job, they wouldn't have to move and find a cheaper place to be, right? So everything is like these chain, you know, this domino effect that we really need to address when we are making those changes. But then on the selfish side of mine, I totally second the Foster's sentiment. Like, we hit the ground running on this term. I mean, and we have very little support of at the beginning when it came for everything. I mean, the training was exhausting. Everything was kind of a little bit chaotic, and it has been like the first year that I mean, for me personally, it was focused on a couple of things, and they were so immense because we are dealing with this pandemic. Now I started to focus on in a broader things of items, and yet my term is almost over. So it's like you don't have time to really grasp the entire concept of the council. And I'm one of those privileged people that did find good people on the staff, good people, good other colleagues and others that I could collaborate with, or they help me and carry me through all of this. But a 2-year term, I mean, it is really counterproductive. I mean, I can see how I think it will really reduce the constant turnover, but it will actually help you get things done. I mean, I don't think there's one thing there's not much you can get done in 2 years as an audit of this moment, because there's a lot going on, and I get it. We're in the middle of the pandemic. Maybe things were different before. I don't know. Maybe things will be different as time, as we get out of this situation. But again, strongly support a 4-year term, but having some safeguards to ensure that we are inclusive, trying to bring in people to serve that perhaps are not as privileged as we are in our financial situation or housing stability situation, for example.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole. Alder Paulson.
I think 4 years is just too long of a commitment. How far out am I planning my life in 4-year chunks? This job is a lot. It's a lot of every morning you wake up and you see what's come in overnight and who needs help with what now. And when you're looking at this, it's like, do I want to sign up for another 4 years of this? I think that's just a little bit too much. And so I get that 2 years is also not a lot of time. I actually think 3 years is the right is a nice compromise, and we could talk about that later. But I think 4 years is just too long is too long for this body to make you have a sign up. And I think you're going to have a lot of folks quitting midterm if we go to 4. So I'm not a big fan of 4 years here.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Vice President Curry.
Thank you. I've been doing a lot of listening, and to me, the answer is complex. I feel like it's intersectional with some of the other questions that we're saying, and agreeing that we don't want to take to referendum the fact that there needs to be more kind of education around what these questions on a referendum mean and the impacts. But I also see another layer. We've talked about this in council of culture. And in that context, we were talking about culture within the council and some of the reminders that we all should hold ourselves and each other accountable to in how culture impacts how effective or how quickly, let's say, we can discuss and move policy along. For me, I agree that 4 years is enough time to get a footing in this role, but had I not joined the council, I would think differently about that. And so I think education of the public, looking towards BCCs, how we're introducing folks to how, our government municipality does business, and keeping equity at the forefront and making improvements. So it's not as easy to me as making it a 4-year term. I think too, like what Alder Figueroa Cole said about pay, I would feel weird getting paid more to do the job part-time for 4 years, but I also feel like the emotional time and some of the things that aren't considered there should be factored into that pay. And then the last comment I'll make then also goes within culture of with the community and those who are engaging in residents and even maybe those who want to run for office, what they can expect from an alder or what an alder's role details, because I think that there's some ambiguity there often. And so I don't know. It's hard for me to say, yes, I want to go this way, because I feel like in some realm, all of the questions intersect to me. Yeah, that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Vice President Curry. Appreciate that. I think I'll give my thoughts. I mean, I think the TFOG stuff was so difficult for me because there was no right answer. I really would love to say, here's the way we're going to do it, and that's the way it's going to work great if we do it that way. We don't know what 4 years means. We don't know what 2 years means. We don't know what 10 alders mean or full-time or et cetera. I will say from my personal experience, I did not feel like I knew how to do this job very well until I was at least 2 years in. And so I think the time and the time investment an alder needs to make to learn to do this job well as the investment the city staff makes, and getting people up to speed on the ridiculous amount of things that we need to understand and try to figure out. It is an absolute shame to think that there are some alders that would just be around for 2 years. Now, I also recognize what Alder Paulson says, is that this is an overwhelming job that is incredibly difficult. It's very taxing on people's lives, emotionally, time-wise, et cetera. A 4-year commitment is a long time. But I'm a fan of increasing the term length. I think the idea of turning around and having to run for re-election right as you've figured out the job is so incredibly difficult to think about. I'm going to vote yes for this. I would like to see Alder Foster bring it back, because if you start to think about the implementation of this, we really need to understand what it looks like. We wouldn't implement it for 2023 because I don't think you can tell alders that you're running for a job that you're not going to be sure is 2 or 4 years. The voters are going to decide. We may not have anybody want to run for alder if they're not sure how long that's going to be. And then if you're implementing it in 2025, does that mean you're now going to have alder elections that are not at the same time as the mayoral elections? And so then are you looking to implement it at the next mayoral election? And then obviously Alder Paulson has an alternative where, he'd like us to probably discuss a different thing. There's also an Alder Foster in the past has looked at staggering, and I've got some strong thoughts about the staggering thing. So I'd like to see us bring back the term limit discussion here with some verbiage suggestions, and be open for discussion on staggering and when it actually is implemented, et cetera. But if there is a desire for this committee to, look at the term limit thing and likely, I would assume, I haven't heard differently this evening, look at some of the other questions we can, but I think we'll probably just be looking at the term limit item and trying to figure out the exact way to phrase that to make that recommendation to council. That would be my vote. Alder Paulson.
This is very quick. I just wanted to go back to 2024 in putting things on the ballot. Then 2024, there will be countywide elections, so it's not a question of having to do anything special. So everyone will have a ballot in 2024. It's also the presidential primary, so people are going to turn out for it. So there will be.
Our municipal elections won't be the same as the presidential primary.
We haven't changed that yet at the state.
I don't recall us having presidential primary at the same time as Alder elections,
They were in April.
or as county elections.
County
obviously
board's
we
up in April, and presidential primary last time was in April. I mean, the presidential primary might move around, but right now it's still in April.
So just so you're clear, we'd have to pay to be on the ballot. The county's not going to include us for free. So it is not a free cost to us, and so we can certainly look at that. I'm not sure. We can get a legal opinion next time. We could ask staff to look into that, whether or not we can legally obligate the council to put something on the ballot in 2024. But that certainly could be up for discussion.
Certainly, we've put ballot questions on the on ballots in the past, and I don't think it will break the bank. So I don't think that we need to worry too much about the cost here. I think it's worth considering.
We have put ballot questions on our elections. This would not be a city election. That would be a county election.
Okay,
we could talk.
So
I will make sure that for our discussion when we actually talk about the questions and when we put it on and when we implement it, that the attorney and the clerk's office give us all the details we need on when we could put it on. Can we as a council tell another council what to do? Because we're not going to have the same alders heading into 2024. Right. So there are all sorts of things to figure out there. We'll make sure that that's made clear for the next discussion on this.
Fair. But I think it's worth considering the possibility of still having a little bit more time to have a public discussion, even if it's not necessarily this council that ultimately does it.
Sure. Thank you. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I just wanted to remind folks that if Alder Bennett were here, she would not be in favor of this. And given my newly redistricted District 2, I represent a lot of students too. So there are some downsides to this. There are downsides and upsides to all of these things, I guess, but that's something we need to think about in some ways. That makes me wonder if 3 years is a better idea, but I can't imagine a student running for Alder making a decision to run for Alder in their freshman year, but you never know. Thanks.
Thanks, Alder Heck. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Yeah, we had, I think that, like you said, Patrick, there has been discussions. I think she's still back and forth on that, but yes, the student vote is relevant. But I think there's pros and cons on that too. Like it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's not a one way for that body either. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole. Any other discussion? So we're clear. Alder Foster, would you say your motion would be that we would continue work towards bringing it back here? What after the discussion, is there any way you want to? Would you like to restate your motion to make sure everybody knows what they're voting on?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I'm also just trying to think through timing on the fly in my head, and it does seem like, I mean, the sooner there's a decision out of council, the better in terms of any educational informational campaign. So, and I'm just, thinking through the brief discussion we've had here, I wonder if it doesn't make sense for me to actually work on something, introduce it and refer it here. So we have that conversation and we have a recommendation coming out of here back to council, because I don't think in any case we're going to get out of a very robust discussion at council on this, and having like 2 robust discussions at CCEC on it. I guess I'm debating if that's going to be helpful or not at this point. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of leaning at this point to maybe just working on a draft of what I'm thinking. Obviously, those are all substitutes and amendments and all those sorts of things can happen. Maybe just introduce it with a referral to CCEC, then we can have that discussion here, and CCEC can be the the lead committee and can have the recommended action get in front of council. So I don't know, President Furman, if you have any initial thoughts on that, or if you've got a different idea.
I think my suggestion based on the discussion today would be for you to withdraw your motion, for not to take any sort of confusing vote this evening, and that's for you to introduce something and we can come bring it here and and chop it up and figure out how we want that to look. I think there's certainly some strong there's going to be strong discussion, and there's going to be some disagreements on what that looks like. I can't even tell you this evening what would get consensus, but I don't think we even have the ability to make a motion tonight that would get consensus. That makes sense. So,
Yeah, I would withdraw that with consent of the body.
not seeing any objection. I think we have talked about the referendum enough for this evening. I think we'll be talking about it some more, but I agree that we need to figure it out if we're going to do something soon to give us as much lead time as possible. And I think there is a brain-numbing amount of different ways to do it, but we will go through that. I look forward to that. All right, I'm going to move on to our next item, which is our our council office update. Karen has sent out that update while we were here at CCEC or somewhere around that. And so I'm going to turn over the meeting to her to give her an opportunity to give us a brief update on that update.
Thank you very much. Let me get my screens in order. What am I doing? Okay. So yeah, everyone should have this in their email box, and I attached it in Legistar as well. We have good news. We have our legislative administrative assistant hired, and she's starting on Monday. And this is very good news. I'm very excited about this. She's coming up to us from the assessor's office. And so when she starts, I'm going to have her send an information, an introductory email to all alders, and please welcome her to the team. Debbie's going to be transitioning as we onboard Liz. Debbie's going to be transitioning those tasks back to that position, the council agenda tasks and so on and so forth. So we have a little bit more transition in front of us, but that is that's the plan. I'm very excited about this. And then my old position, the legislative analyst position, is well into the process. Supplemental essays are being reviewed right now. So in a couple of weeks, we'll start interviews. So I'm really crossing fingers for to be able to make an offer by the end of the month on that one. That's going to be really huge too. And then the community engagement specialist is finally moving. So it should be on the agenda for Tuesday for your, again, approval. And then that means it can be posted. So as soon as that happens, I told HR, please post as soon as you possibly can. And we can get going with that. So I'm feeling optimistic. I really am. And then I just had a note here that I would like to send some members of our office to the YWCA Racial Justice Summit at the end of September. Haven't figured out, because we don't know exactly who's going to be here by that point. Hopefully everyone. And we can figure out how to coordinate it. But we just got the information about the summit, and it's something that I'd like to encourage members of the staff to attend. I would also say, alders, you may look at that too in case it's interesting to you. I believe everybody got an email, hopefully, about that.
I will note that city staff is working on a discount for city staff to be able to register for that conference. That's been the case in 2021 and 2020, and it seems like it will be the case again this year. I believe the city has sponsored that event in the past and will likely be sponsoring it again. So alders should be aware that it's a great event, something that alders should be considering, and that there will be a city discount very likely available.
Wonderful. As we talked about last time, we're overdue for the 2023 council schedule. So I've been working with finance, the clerk's office, and leadership to come up with a draft. I think we have a draft pretty well sorted out. Unfortunately, I was not able to avoid back-to-back meetings. I tried. But I just want finance to take one quick look at it again to make sure it works with what they need time-wise and for budget. And I will have this back to this body for review. I would say next meeting, if it fits on your schedule. So that's good. Yep. So I put in something here because I wanted to first just let you know there's going to be hopefully some safety training in October in the chambers. Now that we're back in the chambers, I'll let you know more as we work this out. But I also wanted to say, organizational development, and you get an email weekly, has really bolstered their offerings, and and because they're available to alders as well for no extra charge, I really recommend that alders take a look at that and see if there's anything they'd like to take advantage of. I've gone to some really good ones lately, and I recommend it's an opportunity. I may, eventually what I'd like to do is start doing a more sort of regular sort of chief of staff update to everyone and highlight some of the good things that I see coming, that y'all might want to take a look at, that you might want to try, and so on. So as we get situated here, I'm excited about that. But I just wanted to let you know. Oh, Alder Foster.
Thanks. On the safety training from MPD, can you just share a little bit more info what that is?
So at this point, it's active shooter training. So I don't know if President Furman, if you wanted to speak to this at all, or how much detail to get into about it.
I feel like I don't want to put her on the spot. Vice President Curry, I think you have articulated the active shooter training quite well. I don't know if you want to articulate it in the way I've heard you say it in the past, or you just want me to quickly take it. I think the idea is we live in a time where it's important for us to understand how to deal with an active shooter, unfortunately, and so it's intended. It's a program that the MPD does with other community organizations. It would be done in the council chamber, and people would understand. God forbid we have an incident like that. How to respond to that. It's just the reality of where we are as a society. So, Vice President Curry has raised her hand. I don't know if she wants to articulate that better than I. Go ahead, Vice President Curry.
Thank you. My wild eyes were trying to recount specifically what I said, and I could not. But context-wise, it's something that the mayor's office, council office, and council leadership have been working towards, unfortunately. And looking, for instance, at the Highland Park connection with Madison of being realistic about, the things in our society right now, but also equipping folks with tools. I think another piece of that is de-escalation training for department heads that I know the mayor's office is very much pushing due to experiencing on our own some members of the public coming in and not necessarily following the guidelines of in-person in terms of speaking or relinquishing the microphone. And so I'll even say last Tuesday in Chambers, I was watching, there was a gentleman come in who looked like he really didn't know where he was gonna go. And I'm looking around to see if anybody's responding. So I think it's taking into account all of the dynamics of returning in person, knowing that there are some alders who are in council for the first time, being familiar, I'll be honest too, we did a active shooter training with former and current law enforcement, but they were representing consulting agencies, and muscle memory was a big piece of it. And so while you're in chambers, having someone who's familiar and equipped in that type of training. I think another point to add is from EAP staff or Employee Assistance Program staff recommending specifically MPD and I think it's a Sergeant Magdalene. In leadership at MPD and recommending that in terms of the interactiveness and relatability for the training specifically in that building, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you both. And I think kind of where my head was going is part of what you just talked about, Vice President Curry, in the sort of conflict mitigation. And, we I think had a brief discussion at council, maybe at the beginning of the previous term. And then that kind of went away with Zoom meetings, but I do think that would be a good refresher for all members of the council as well. So maybe something could even get, I don't know if we could use one of those informational presentation prior to councils or something, but I think just a conversation now that we're, at least partly back in person, how to de-escalate and kind of just set expectations, because I'm sure none of us have consistent ideas of how that's going to work, and especially looking at you, Vice President Curry, in the Sergeant Arms role. I mean, we just all need to understand what the expectations are and how we're going to handle things. And I think that actually, if I'm remembering, I think the mayor took a pretty leading role in that when we had this previous conversation, and obviously has a huge hand in kind of how managing our meetings, and would be great to have her present and are participating, and just make sure we're all kind of got a sense of how to manage some stressful situations that way as well. So glad to hear it's in the works and fully support that.
And then the last thing on the list is just an update on the Police Civilian Oversight Board. We did hire an hourly administrative aide, and we are onboarding her, and we'll be transitioning the staffing that I had been doing over to her as well. So good news there too. So I'm very happy, and I'm happy to take any questions, comments, suggestions. I mean, I appreciate Alder Foster provided a suggestion there. More of that on anything on here, not on here. I'm here to. I'd like to hear from you as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. As always, appreciate the update on what's going on. All right. Lastly, I want to show people a brief version of our upcoming schedule for CCEC. I will say that as promised, as I said earlier, I'm going to, between now and the next meeting, do some work on longer timelines and not just doing a meeting by meeting schedule, so people can understand what to expect and we can make sure we're ready for stuff. Let me share my screen so you can see what I am talking about and what we're likely to have at our next meeting, and go over very quickly what I call my no assignment column, and see if anybody has any suggestions on things to add there. At our next meeting, which is 8/11, we would have an item referred to us related to recording all open session meetings. And so that would mean every committee would be recorded, whether it's video or audio. And so if it's via Zoom, it's easy to press the record button. We're working out the logistics of meetings that would be in person, that would be tier 2 meetings that wouldn't have any sort of city channel support, just having an audio recording. Certainly better than what's going on now, which is we have certain committees that just are meeting virtually and are not being recorded. I think that's a problem. So I've requested that the ordinance be changed to require recording, require them to press that button. As I said, we're trying to figure out the logistics of what to do about in-person meetings that wouldn't be tier 1 meetings covered by council, by city channel staff. And we'll talk more about that when it's referred here. We'll have a little bit more insight on the implementation plan for that. I think it's time for us to have a hybrid discussion about committee meetings. It is my understanding, and we'll get more clarification, that type 2 meetings won't be able to do hybrid. So type 2 meetings would be meetings, would have to be either in person or virtual. And the question you may be asking yourself is, what is a type 2 meeting? We'll talk more about that in our discussion. And we have a list of what the type 1 meetings are and the type 2 meetings, and why there are limitations to the hybrid, and what our suggestions are. But I think my thought on the committee stuff is for us to come up with a framework and not necessarily mandate anything, and just have suggestions on, if you're going to do it, here's how it has to be done, or here's how it should be done. Here are things to consider, and let committees to continue to make their decisions on what works best for that committee. We have an item that we've been pushing, but making sure that we are giving good feedback to our chief of staff, and what that looks like. I believe that will be on our next agenda, assuming we can get things ready for that. Karen had mentioned talking about the Common Council schedule, so we can have that on our next agenda. I don't know if that means we're going to try to introduce it and refer it here, or we're going to get a preview before it's introduced. We'll figure out the logistics of that. We're overdue for a discussion on what the heck is the BCC admin support team that we talked about a little bit with TFOGs. And then obviously our regular reoccurring council office update, which is helpful for all. Those are my thoughts. I don't know if anybody sees anything on this list. I do think once we figure out the council schedule, we should talk about a CCEC schedule and try to get CCEC meetings for 2023 scheduled as early as possible. So hopefully other committees don't conflict with CCEC. If we could shoulder our way into jockey our way into a good position. At some point, we're still looking to talk about district reports, whether or not we want to start that up. Newer alders may have no idea what I'm talking about with that, but we could talk about that in more detail. BCC structure, we need to continue that discussion. I don't know if that's something that is ready for the 31st. I don't know if that's something that actually might be ready for our 8/11 meeting, but we will figure that out and get the schedule finalized. Other stuff that's in the agenda, the no assignment column is at some point we're getting back an emergency management plan. We've talked about doing community events. Council agenda creation and deadlines. That was a discussion item that somebody had requested for understanding what it takes for. I mean, I've been an alder for a bit, 4 years and 2 weeks. So it will be my 4-year anniversary as an alder. And until I was council president, I had very little insight on what went into creating the agenda and all the things that all the complications, et cetera. I think it's good for CCEC to talk about that, especially with having a new hire in that position and see if there's any refinements that we should be making there, et cetera. At some point, we should get an update on our legislature update. Social event, we can talk about more here at some point too. Audio, video recording, we've got that. We have a council report policy that we should talk about what we want to see when people go to report conferences with using their funds in their alder account. They're supposed to be doing a report here at CCEC. We should talk about whether or not we want that to continue. It hasn't been very consistent. Meeting length, we need to continue to talk about checking that hybrid, and obviously BCC structure is a continued discussion item. A lot of Keith talking. I don't know if there's anything that jumped out for anybody that they want to note, or if we've had a good long enough discussion and somebody wants to call it a night.
Okay.
Alder Foster, go ahead.
I was going to make the final motion, but Alder Figueroa-Cole might want to say something. Maybe they're looking to do the same thing. Move adjournment.
Second. That's what I was going
Unless
to
I see
say.
any objection, I will assume unanimous consent. Have a good night. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Night.